Okay, so I was curious if people who thought that the rafting trip was too scary, um, if they would have a particular relationship to satisfaction and some of the other variables that we looked at. So what I did is I copied the general structure of this dummy coded variable here, where we turned all values that were not threes into zeros and turned the threes into ones. So basically, it was counting up how many dimensions of the trip the participants thought was just the right amount of intensity. Um, so I made a version of that for scary, and so what that was is a little bit different. Is it recoded all the fours for the kind of arousing sort of things like challenge and stress and thrills, that sort of thing. So things that were too thrilling or too stressful by a little bit became ones, and those that were way too stressful became twos, and everything else became a zero. Um, and then obviously the things that are reverse coded, the boring, conservative, and feeling safe items, the ones became twos and twos became ones, and everything else became a zero. So basically, this is just kind of summing up how intense people thought that was. And then I just summed those up, and I made a variable called toScary. And when I looked at this distribution, it's actually a couple histograms ago, it was very skewed. There was like one person out here that it basically had said everything was way too scary and not boring enough. It had 16, so or something like that. It was pretty far out there. So what I did is I just made I recoded this so that basically everyone who had a 5 or higher became a 5. So this right here, this is now a whole bunch of people that used to be scattered out here between 5 and 16 are all grouped into 5. And then the other folks I just copied across. And I just made it explicit so it would be real clear. As a 0 was a 0, 1 was 1. I just copied them across. I could have just said, 5 to high equals 5, else equals copy, and then it would have worked also. But I thought this would be a little more explicit so it would be more clear what was happening. So now I'm going to do the same thing for bored. I was thinking, okay, so what about people who thought it wasn't stimulating enough and it was too boring? And so what I'm doing now is I made a new version of the original variable and put a b at the end. So I've put those b's in there. So what I need to do now here is change all these s's to b's. And I'm just going to do it by hand. I could maybe go back into Excel and redo this there. But I'm just going to do it right here. And it takes a little while, but this sort of stuff is kind of standard for this sort of work. Once you kind of know the general structure, now you're going to say, I'm going to make a bunch of variables, and then you have to remember to change it in both locations here because we're recoding the variable with the b suffix, into itself. So recoding it into itself, and then we're going to have to change all of these items for the recode here to focus on instead of the high range, they need to focus on the low range. So remember here we want let's see, the 2 to become a 1 and the 1 to become a 2, right? And then we could just copy that general structure, copy, and then paste, paste, paste. And now we're to our recoded items, and then what we want to do is put the structure that is appropriate for the high end on those. And then I want to copy this. And the order, 2 becoming a 1 or 1 becoming a 2, doesn't matter which of those comes first. It doesn't, R doesn't care. Oh, and we got one more to do that I missed. Here. This is another one of the ones that's reverse coded relative to the arousalness of the experience. Okay, so there, we've done it, I think. Let's see if these run without an error. If they do, it's probably I just forgot to change a B to an S somewhere in there. Seems like it's worked. Sometimes you could still find errors later on. So now we should have a variable that is, or we should have a bunch of variables that have just 3 values, 0, 1, or 2. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and do a histogram of this variable just to check up and see if this worked. Hist, and so it should have 3 columns, this histogram. So see if it does. Hey, it does. Look at that. Almost everyone's a 0, a few people are 1s, and like 1 person was a 2. Fair enough. Okay, so that one worked. So I'm guessing the other ones work too. And so what I'm going to want to do then is I'm going to want to make a variable that adds these up. And so I already made a variable called toScary to add it up the scary versions, and then we'll call this one toBoring instead of toScary. During time, okay. toBoring, and then these all need to be B's instead of S's, right? B, 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 B. Almost done. And then another thing I did is I took a look at this sort of stuff. Let's see. We'll see if there's anyone who thinks this is way too boring before we think about making a second version of this variable. Like a histogram, too boring. Like that. Histogram too boring. Okay, that's interesting. We do have some people who thought it was way too boring. That's interesting. And more people out here in this range than we had for toScary. So we can actually run, I can show you that if you want. Hist of toScary. Looks like that. So those people were pretty rare. So it's actually interesting is that there's kind of more people that thought it wasn't exciting than people who thought it was too exciting that filled out the survey. That's an important thing to remember, is that you might have the people who thought it was really scary. They might not even bother to fill out the survey, unfortunately. So we don't really know. But if the rates of participation were not related to kind of the scariness or the boringness, then we have evidence that people could be a little more aroused. And since arousal seems to be positively related to, or the right level of arousal seems to be positively related to satisfaction, then maybe we should ramp that up. And I'm not going to show you both at once, but here's toBoring, which is looking rather different, to be honest. I wonder what these actual values are on these. So if you remember, what we want to do is give this histogram a name, the histogram for toBoring. I'll just call it results B, and then it gets this. And then if we ask for that afterwards, results B, it'll tell us about it. But one thing we might want to do actually is we want to put a lot more breaks in there. We'll equal like 30 of them, and then we'll know that we're getting kind of single integers in each of these for sure. All right, so there we go. I wonder if I messed this up somehow. Didn't copy one of these across because we don't have anyone coming up as a 0. Let's see. Yeah, I'm probably going to want to do a histogram of each of these. I would have thought that there would have been, there would have to be if there were people who thought it was too scary. So extremely. So yeah, so I'm going to need to look at this. I would think that this category here, these would be your zeros. But the breaks are at 2.5, 3.0. So maybe there's the group up to that, so 209 people, or up to 2.5, but I don't know. I have to look. So anyways, this is sort of thing that happens. You're like, okay, I'm going to make a variable. I think I got this result, and then you're wondering a little bit, did I do that right? Is there an error in here someplace? So I'm going to have to go back and look at all of these items and make sure that I didn't do any forgetting a key detail in my recoding. And then if I haven't, then this is kind of interesting, I think, because then it would say that would probably be good to ramp up the intensity a little bit if possible. Anyways, that's that.